The tubular cast-on is ideal for projects that begin with ribbing because it creates a tidy, very stretchy edge. It's worked flat, but it can be used for flat or in the round projects. In this video, I'll demonstrate the waste yarn method of the tubular cast-on in the continental style of knitting. But don't worry if you're an English style knitter. The stitches are simple and written instructions are in the tutorial, which is linked in the description box below if you're watching on YouTube. To do the tubular cast on, you start with a provisional cast on, and I prefer the crochet cast on. So you're going to use waste yarn, and I have my crochet cast on almost done. There is a separate video for that, also linked in the description box. So I'm just going to do the last stitch. And if you were using this cast on not as a provisional cast on but as a regular cast on, you would transfer that last loop to your needle and begin knitting. But since we're doing a provisional cast on, I've casted on the number of stitches I need. I'm doing 10 for this demonstration, and I'm going to just crochet a 3 or 4 stitch chain here on the end and make a big loop, and I like to pull that last stitch tight and then cut the yarn so there's just a little tail with the loop, and that way I know which end to unravel when it comes time to pull out this provisional cast on. Alright, so once we have the provisional cast on done, we take our working yarn that we're going to use for the project and attach it by simply knitting into the front stitch. So we're going to knit and then yarn over, and we're going to do that the whole way across the row. Knit, yarn over, knit, yarn over, the whole way across the row. And we're going to end with a knit. Then we're going to turn our work, and on the second row we are going to slip one, knit one the whole way across, ending with a slip one. And when we slip, we're always going to have our yarn in front. So we're going to slip one, knit one, slip one, knit one. Now, if you notice, if you look close at this, some of the stitches have, it's like a little purl bump on the bottom. It's actually exactly what it is. And all of the ones that have a little purl bump we're going to slip, and the ones that do not have a purl bump we're going to knit. And that is true the whole way through this cast on. Now, if your last stitch like that gets all loose and wonky like mine is, just pull on the tail and it'll tighten it up. Now we're going to turn and do row 3, which is just the opposite of row 2. It's knit one, slip one. And again, we're going to knit the stitches that look like a knit stitch and slip the stitches that look like a purl stitch. So see how this second stitch has a purl bump under it, and so does the 4th stitch and the 6th stitch. So all of the ones that look like a knit stitch we're going to knit, and all the ones that look like a purl stitch we're going to slip. So we're going to knit, slip the whole way across this row, ending with a knit. Always remembering to slip with the yarn in front. Now we're going to repeat those last 2 rows one more time. So this first stitch, if you forget where you're at, remember, look at your stitches. If it looks like a purl stitch, you're going to slip it. That first stitch looks like a purl stitch, so I know I'm on the row where I slip the first stitch and knit the next stitch, and just slip knit the whole way across. And now row 5 is exactly like row 3. So we're going to knit, slip the whole way across, ending with a knit. Now this cast on usually produces one extra stitch from what your pattern calls for. So in this next row, which is the transition row to ribbing, we typically have to reduce it by one stitch. And if you're knitting flat and so the way I do it normally is by either knitting 2 or purling 2 together on the very first 2 stitches of the row or round, or the very last 2 stitches of the row or round, whichever makes my pattern work according to how it's written in the pattern that I'm using. So let's say that if this was a flat project and it started with knit 2, purl 2, or I'm sorry, knit 1, purl 1 ribbing, then what I have here is purl 1, knit 1, purl 1 the whole way across. But I want it to be knit 1, purl 1 the whole way across. So I'm going to knit these first 2 stitches together. So that'd be a knit, and then this stitch is a purl, knit, purl the whole way across. If I wanted to start with a purl in my row, I would just go ahead and purl, knit the whole way across. And when I get to the last 2 stitches, I would knit 2 together, because it'd be purl and then knit, and this last one would be purl, but that's an extra stitch. So I would purl them together to get down to the right number of stitches for the pattern. Now, if you're joining in the round, you would join in the round like you normally do. And again, you can knit 2 together or purl 2 together at the beginning or end of the round, whichever makes your pattern work out. When you join to knit in the round, you're going to have a little gap, like I have here on my little hat, and we use our tail yarn. So you give yourself a little extra tail when you're knitting in the round, so you can do this. So we just use our tail yarn to sew that little gap shut. So I'm just going to go in under the stitches there, and then there's no one way to do this, as long as it looks nice. It's fine. There we go. It's sewed that shut, and then I would just poke my yarn to the inside and sew my tail in as normal. Okay. So now that we've got the cast on done, we can take out this waste yarn by simply pulling on the little chain that we did there at the end of the, and you can see how just nice and easy that comes out, as long as you didn't split the yarn while you were knitting. And this, I like to stop here because this demonstrates kind of why it's called the tubular cast on. You can see that yarn is completely encased in the knitting. There is actually a little tube there at the bottom of your knitting, and we just pull the waste yarn out of that, and you have a beautiful little ribbed cast on edge that reminds me a little bit of an infinity pool. It just goes right over the edge there seamlessly. Front and back look the same. Now the tubular bind off matches the tubular cast on perfectly, and there is a link to that in the tutorial if you want to learn how to do the tubular bind off. So if you're doing a scarf, for example, that has ribbing on both ends of the scarf, you could do the tubular cast on one end and the tubular bind off on the other end to make it match perfectly.